This is OTR FM, part of the IOM radio network.
Welcome to Cracked, the podcast, the program that slays the dragons of mental health by stripping away the shame, embarrassment, fear, and stigma. Because mental health isn't something that affects just some of us, it applies to all of us. Here to shine a new light on areas of mental health that often go unvisited are your hosts, Rebecca Shaper and Sandie Sedgbeer.
Hello and welcome to Crack the Podcast, Slaying the Dragons of Mental Health, with me, Sandie Sedgbeer.
And me, Rebecca Shaper.
There are many natural aids and solutions to help support our physical, emotional and mental well-being. Many date back thousands of years before pharmaceutical drugs were even a consideration. The ancient Greeks, Romans, Egyptians and Chinese all believed in the therapeutic and healing properties of plant oils and essences, while there are numerous references to these in the Bible. Lorie Eve Dechar is an acupuncturist, an alchemical healer, an artisan of transformation, and author of 3 books, 5 Spirits, Kigo, and The Alchemy of Inner Work, a guide for turning illness and suffering into true health and well-being. Her background includes a master's degree in acupuncture, training in archetypal psychology, Gestalt, focus-oriented psychotherapy, and Zen mindfulness meditation, as well as 15 years as a senior faculty at the Tri-State College of Acupuncture in New York. In 2013, with her husband, Benjamin Fox, she co-founded A New Possibility, a healing and learning community committed to inner work that leads to outer change. Lorie joins us now to explain how essential oils and flower remedies affect both our psyche and our physical health, and how applying these to specific acupoints on your body can provide a quick, healthy, and natural alternative solution to drugs in helping to alleviate symptoms of stress, anxiety, and depression when life gets fraught. Lorie, welcome.
Well, thank you so much, Sandie, for that lovely introduction. I'm always like, wow, that's really me.
It is you.
I've been at it for a while. And Rebecca, lovely to see you too. It's really an honor to be with you both. And I couldn't be more excited about the topic, is how do we heal ourselves and maintain our health and resilience without resorting to pharmaceuticals when really there's other ways.
Yes, and as I said, have been for millennia. Where I want to start is, you note that even as life expectancy continues to rise globally and the overall state of humanity is claimed to be better now than at any time in history, there are a lot of new diseases such as autoimmunity, allergies, Lyme disease. There's unprecedented levels of addiction occurring, depression, anxiety, suicide, and obesity. And all of these are actually causing a decline in physical vitality across the globe. So what is going on here? And how is it that alchemical healing, which is what you practice, can open up a new conversation about our physical health? So tell us a little bit about that.
Okay, well, I love how you're putting that together there, because of course the statistics say one thing. You know, life expectancy is expanding and certain forms of illnesses we have eradicated or we're able to keep at bay. But what we're not looking at with statistics is actually the quality of our life. Maybe it's longer in some countries, although, you know, given what we're dealing with now with COVID, everything's a bit up in the air as far as the numbers. But we can say life expectancy is longer. But what about the quality of our life? What about feeling like we have meaningful, purposeful lives filled with loving, supportive relationships, that we enjoy using our bodies, being in our bodies, that our emotions are basically we're living a life of at least some joy, some feeling of satisfaction. So those are questions that my husband Benjamin and I work with in what we call alchemical healing work. Benjamin Fox focuses on astrology and community building as actually a way of healing. And my work is, as you said, I in Chinese medicine and depth psychology, counseling, and what I call alchemy. And what I think, just in brief, what alchemy is looking at is how do we actually transform through a life, not degrade. When we say that the thing that everyone's heard, lead into gold, they weren't really talking about taking a hunk of lead and making a big bag of gold so we could get rich. Right. Although some alchemists were actually put in jail and kings would say, okay, make me gold, But what they're really looking at is how do I transform the raw material, the conditions, some of the challenges, just basically living in a body. How do I transform that into gold making? Which is another way of saying into making wisdom, is it into making compassion, into making purpose in my life, into making my life something that I can look back on and say, I did what I was supposed to do here. So that's the very short form. If we talk about alchemy as the art of transformation, we're looking at healing as transformational process, whether that's through astrology, Chinese medicine, depth psychology, flower essences, oils, everything that we use, we're looking at that question of where does this person want to go? What would it look like if I was living the life I meant to live?
I love that. My question for you is, you and your husband practice and teach what you call modern day alchemy.
Yes.
Which you say you discovered by accident. Can you talk about your first treatment and how the psychological medicine opened up a whole new awareness for you?
Yes. Well, Rebecca, I appreciate that question. And I do talk about it a bit in the book, The Alchemy of Inner Work.
Right.
When I say by accident, when I discovered alchemy, I'd already been practicing Chinese medicine, but more in a standard way, not only physical, but emotional to some extent. But somehow I kept feeling like, yes, people feel better after the treatment, but their life isn't changing. Like their whole life, how they're behaving, how they're feeling day to day. And I, meanwhile, was going through a massive divorce with my daughter's father, who I now just think is a wonderful guy, but that was 20 years ago. We were just like going at it the way humans can somehow do that, even with perfectly nice people. Anyway, we were in the middle of that, and I was really having a kind of an emotional breakdown, truly. It was my early 40s, and I'd never been off on my own. We were divorced. I had a young child, and I was having terrible insomnia, terrible panic attacks that I never had before. In fact, the first panic attack I had was then, and I thought that I must have taken some kind of toxic poison into my body because I was shaking and sweating and feeling palpitations, and I didn't know what it was. And then those continued. And I tried everything. Of course, I was already in alternative healing. So I tried acupuncture, I tried this, I tried that, and nothing was getting at it. I tried hormone replacement, I tried antidepressants, nothing. And I got the name of a man who changed my life, Nathan Schwartz-Salant, who was a Jungian analyst, but I say a closet alchemist, a closet magician. And I went to my first session, and sitting in this very standard kind of New York City analyst's office. And all of a sudden, there was I felt a kind of flow of chi in the space. And I felt that I was being listened to, heard, and seen in a way that I had never experienced before. And that's what alchemists call a kind of field of relationality, or an energetic field that actually is a flowing of what we can call psychic energy, the energy of the soul.
Yeah. Let me ask you, Lorie, when you felt that, did you feel it was like energy that y'all were giving each other? And do you also feel like that you were just more open at that point when you went into his office, and that's why you felt the chi? And for the listeners, do you mind just talking what chi is? There may be some listeners out there.
Yes, good, yes. Good, let's back up.
Okay.
So qi is a Chinese word, and it became, it's used to some degree as an English word now, but it's still an unfamiliar word. It's, when you spell it, it's CH''I. That's how we usually write it in English. Sometimes it's QI, so people, if you see that, CH''I or QI, it's qi. And what qi, it's a Chinese concept, and in a way, it's what distinguishes Chinese medicine from Western medicine. Because the Chinese understood the body just as we do, that we have muscles, bones, organs, and blood, but they also believe, which I believe and have seen, that there's a flowing of life force through the channels of the body, and it has specific pathways that they've mapped that we call meridians. And what we're talking about actually a little bit later today, the points are places on these flowing meridians of life force where, whether you want to say the divine or the wisdom of our bodies or whatever it is, there are these little doorways into the chi flow. For people who like electrical illusions, you could think of it as a circuit, like we've got a circuit of energy. It is. My brother was an electrician, and he always got it. He was like, "Oh, I get it." Like you stick the screwdriver in there, and then the flow opens. So chi is the current of life that runs through all of nature, and every one of us, everything that lives, has chi.
So what you're basically working with is you're working with the chi, and you're using other subtle energy fields, frequencies, when you're using things like flower remedies and essential oils, and you're applying them all together.
Exactly, Sandie. That's exactly it. Now, what happened for me in that moment when I experienced this amazing, all of a sudden, the panic lifted, the shaking, the anxiety, it was actually a flow of chi from someone's care, from this deep being seen.
Yeah.
Which in itself is a subtle form of energy exchange.
Yes.
You're picking that up in the field and having a response to it.
Yes.
Right. Yes.
And Rebecca, your question, which I think is a really good one, was I particularly open to it? I would say that is when we say in the book, how do we transform suffering into possibility? Right. Yes, I think at those moments when we think we're the most cracked, when we're the most broken, it was definitely how the light got in, just what you say on your beautiful opening page, Leonard Cohen's wisdom. I was cracked. I had been broken open by the divorce, by my fears of survival, and it was the best thing that could have happened to me.
That's incredible. I love that story. And thank you so much for sharing that. It's beautiful.
I mean, it's the funniest thing now because, of course, we have this wonderful granddaughter. And, my ex-husband and I, we went at it like, you know how that can be. It was like, who are these people? Now we see each other. We're like smiling. Our hearts are open because we broke each other open.
Yeah.
and healed. We both are blessed by beautiful family and healing. And yeah.
Do you think you and your husband your first husband had a soul contract together to get to where you are today? And there were lessons learned from each other from this, and now you're here?
100%.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
think we're definitely on the same page.
Oh, yes. I understand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes when I say that to younger patients who are, I'm working with someone, I say, someday you'll thank that person. And they're like,
Yeah.
you're out of your mind.
Oh, yeah.
Well, yeah. Relationships are our best teachers.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yes.
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 And that's a key piece of alchemy.
Yes.
When you look at old alchemical drawings, you often see the king and the queen, or a tiger and a dragon, because they're looking at exactly that, Sandie, the potent transformational power of relationship.
So I'm curious to know, at what point, I mean, you've studied all these things, Gestalt, Jungian therapy. At what point did you start bringing all of this together?
Okay. So, I started working on my first book, Five Spirits. That was what the kind of emergence, when we talk about, I think of even now, like we say, we're in an emergency. I was in an emergency, but then you ask what's emerging, what's emergent from the emergency. And I think that this work that has taken me another 20 years to really, I've been working on it for over 20 years, but it began to emerge from that breakdown, from that emergency, which I began going back into Chinese medicine through the lens of what I would call archetypal psychology, because that had been what had made the difference for me, was understanding the power of psychic energy, of how it forms into images, and how those images and these connections can actually heal us. So I said, okay, do I now drop everything, move to Zurich and become a Jungian analyst? Or do I go back into Chinese medicine and look and see, what was their take on this level of healing? And what I discovered is that I then discovered a whole system in Chinese medicine that was not well known and was not being taught in schools, which it's called Wu Shen, the Five Spirits. And the Five Spirits are, in a way, the Taoist chakra system. And some of the points that I want to share with people today actually are access points to these spiritual power centers. So they're very much, the best way to understand them is how we understand the chakras, but they actually look at what we call the psyche, or the mind, as a fully embodied experience. It's not stuck up here in your head. These energies and images live all through our bodies. So once I started working on that book, which is really the only book in English, only book that totally focuses on the Five Spirits, because it just wasn't brought over from mainland China at the time. That was the beginning of how all of the work that I'm doing began to kind of accumulate around this idea of an embodied spiritual matrix. And how do we work with it? And how do we touch it? And how do we harmonize it? And then, of course, Benjamin and I met up somewhere in there, and he was bringing in the archetypes of astrology, and we started to see that between these two systems, there's a huge amount of healing that's possible for people. And that's what we've been teaching and training people to do for now close to 2 decades.
That leads me to my next question is, tell us about the depth of psychology and archetypes and
Yes.
what they are and how people can tap into them.
Right. So that, I would say, circles us back around to alchemy.
Mm-hmm.
Carl Jung, C.G. Jung, was a analyst who lived in and worked in Switzerland, in Zurich. He most of the 20th century, he sort of spanned the early part into the middle of the 20th century. He was one of Freud's main disciples, but he broke with Freud because Freud saw the psyche mostly as almost like an energy machine. I'm just giving very quick here. Freud was an agnostic. He didn't really focus on the spiritual life of humans. Jung said no. He said, yes, the instincts, we've got to deal with them and our, upsets and emotional upsets, but just as powerful as our instincts to survive or for procreation is this instinct to spiritually evolve. That drive to become, live my divine mandate is as strong as any other drive in a human being. And they broke at that point. And Jung went off because Freud really was not going to go there.
Yeah.
And what Jung discovered was that this spiritual drive is embedded in what he calls a kind of collective energetic field. He calls it the collective unconscious. It's in all of us.
Yes.
And that collective unconscious is filled with enlivened, I call them beings, but in psychology, they call them archetypes. They call them archetypes but we're born with them.
Yes.
So they're like the great goddess. I'm watching that in my granddaughter as she emerges into the world. There's already in her a knowing of a mother. She calls her Mommy Nina. Mommy Nina was in Diana before she was born. That's an archetype.
Yeah.
And Daddy David, that's the father archetype. And then I get to be the great grandmother archetype. And, I didn't think I'd like being a grandmother, but suddenly it's so wonderful and it's so primal. And that's the archetype.
Yeah.
So when we all have them and they're all accessible to us through our dreams, through images, through, a tree that you look at. And maybe when we get to the points, we'll actually come back to how people can really in real time use them.
Okay. That sounds great.
So your work overall then is what you're doing is you're kind of redefining healing in a way that allows the soul to come back into the conversation, which is something that is, when it comes to mental health and well-being, the soul is often completely ignored. So, this is something that Rebecca and I both agree. We love your book because, you're offering people who are having what society might call mental health issues, an opportunity that integrates the whole mind, body, soul, spirit part of them and gives them an easy way to rebalance the energy, the chi, if you like, through plants, through the natural world, through the acupuncture points. Yeah, it's beautiful. We're going to go to break now. We'll when we come back, we will be focusing on these acupuncture points.
Great, okie doke, I'll be here.
Okay. So you're listening to Crack the Podcast with me, Sandie Sedgbeer, and my co-host, Rebecca Shaper, and we're speaking with acupuncturist, alchemical healer, artisan of transformation, and author Lorie Eve Dechar about her book, The Alchemy of Inner Work. And after the break, Lorie's going to demonstrate how we can support our emotional, spiritual, and mental health with acupoints, essential oils, and flower essences. So stay tuned. We won't be far away.
real conscious connection. Om Times Radio. IOM FM. Om Times Magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organization, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. Om Times, co-creating a more conscious lifestyle.
Hello, I'm Sandie Sedgbeer, host of Om Times Magazine's flagship radio show, What is Going Om. My passion is sifting through information, research, and innovations from new thought teachers, speakers, and researchers, pushing back the boundaries of what we know about life, energy, metaphysics, and the universe. I love shifting perceptions about who we are, why we're here, and how quickly impossible becomes normal when we open our minds, expand our awareness, and accept that the only limits that exist are those we place upon ourselves. So if you're the kind of forward-thinking, eager investigator of what lies beyond the current reality that most perceive, why not make a date to come play with me in the field of possibilities at 4 p.m. Pacific Time, 7 p.m. Eastern Time every Thursday, and together we can discover what's really going on.
Worried about your friend but don't know how to reach out?
You could say how are you or get a fake tattoo. You could ask with an app if it works for you. You could chat with them in VR. It's so good if you think you should check in. Yeah, you should.
Whatever gets you talking. Reach out to a friend about their mental health. Whatever gets you talking. Learn how you can help at seizetheawkward.org.
Welcome back. Lorie Eve Dechar. For those who are not familiar with flower remedies and essential oils, tell us a little bit about the science of these and how they work on the psyche.
Okay, so we'll just do a very quick overview because sometimes people get confused and they think flower essences and essential oils are the same.
Yeah.
I use them both, and what I love about them is anyone can use them. They're not expensive, you don't need a prescription, and they're very safe. I'm going to just give a very few little safety tips before we get into it. But so like anything that moves the chi, and we're getting back to chi as life force, I say anything that moves the chi can be used as a needle in alchemical healing, including, as we said, a person's attention, their love can be a needle, but flower essences and oils, essential oils, are very good needles that anyone can use on their own bodies, on their points, or on people that you care about, your kids, your partners. Essential oils are actually taken from the resin of plants or the oils. They're distilled. It's an alchemical distillation of the actual plant oils. So they're filled with different kinds of chemical properties and fats and liquids, but the big thing about essential oils is they carry the aroma. So essential oils work through aroma, through smell. And they have a very immediate effect. Actually, they pass through the blood-brain barrier, and they will affect your mood instantaneously. And that's real. That's measurable.
Yes. Yeah.
So there's real stuff in them. And safety caveat number one is unless you have very advanced training, you never take them internally. You don't swallow them. You don't eat them in any way unless you have advanced training, because they are potent and they have a lot of different chemicals in them. And you also want to keep them away from your eyes, always away from your eyes or mucous membranes. Other than that, and I actually dilute them in other oils. So you can just put a few drops, they're very strong, in a little olive oil or sesame safflower oil and apply them directly to the skin, and they're wonderfully safe. And also just smelling them will shift your state of mind. Those are essential oils, and you can buy them. There's many providers online. Look up. The only caveat with that is when you purchase them, I tell people if you want them to have a medicinal or an emotional, mental effect, they need to be what we call pharmaceutical grade. And that will say, you look it up and say pharmaceutical grade essential oil. That means there's nothing added to them for just the aroma. It means it's the plant itself and it's medicinals. And I prefer organically grown, wildcrafted or organically grown. And then if you want to be even more careful, I really, it's nice to check to see if the company is careful about environmental effects, because of course, harvesting these plants, they're harvested all over the world, and some of them are fairly rare. So pharmaceutical grade, organic, and with environmental care would be the things to look for. Other than that, anyone, you can get them from any company, and they're going to be helpful. Flower essences now are a very different animal, plant medicine. Flower essences are actually what we call solarized energy of the plant itself. So there's nothing of the plant in a physical level in a flower essence. What there is the pure vibration of the plant that's captured by sunlight. And actually, it gets gathered up in water, in spring water or filtered water, and preserved in a bottle. It's kind of a miracle. And what I would say is I started out completely thinking it had to be hogwash. Is that a good word? I couldn't see how it would work. Yeah. How you could put these plants, these blossoms on a bowl of water, let the sunlight come through them, and actually create a medicine. But even though I didn't really believe in them, I kept using them and seeing so much change, so much potency on the level that we're talking about, on the level of the soul. And what I've come to understand is that the soul and the spirit are basically our light. Yeah. That's the light as it moves through us. And when we use a medicinal that's basically light in water, it's the right vibration. I use it all the time in my practice now. I use flower essences with almost all my patients.
I have a little story about flower essences. I mean, I've been using them for about 40 years. And like you, when I first came across them, I was very skeptical. I had a very, very timid dog. When he came to me at 14 months old, he was scared of everybody. And I thought, well, here's a good, test case, because we can't say it's mind over matter. So I got some flower essences, but flower remedies for fear and anxiety, and I put them in his water, and it worked. And I became an absolute advocate for flower remedies after that.
Well, that's their wily wisdom, saying, I think they get us to do these things. I've put them in plants when I transplant them, rescue remedy, and they perk right. And I think the flowers are actually finding their way into our lives like that. It's beautiful. I love that story.
I do too, Sandie. I learn something from you every day.
So those two, you would choose when, and they have slightly different effects, but they're both great for mental, emotional issues. Just wonderful allies.
Do you recommend where people can get them, or do you have it on your website? Or
we do. I mean, if people actually join our community, and it's community.anewpossibility.com, if they actually, and that is joining into that community, we have a lot of information. We have And we also have courses on there, which you don't even have to join the community. We have an intro to flower essence course by a wonderful flower essence magician, Lindsay Fauntleroy. She's one of our alchemical healers and an amazing flower essence practitioner. So yeah, there's a lot of information on the site, and also people can go on there even as just visitors and drop us a line, and we'll send them a newpossibility.com.
Okay. Well, this is such a fascinating topic. There's so much we can talk about, but we need to keep an eye on the time, because we know we really want people to have the the opportunity to learn about the points that they can use, and I know that you can do that. So,
well, I want to share a few anyway that I feel like are particularly useful for emotions, but also for this time. And I do want to say, as far as the flower essences, that those Bach flower essences are very readily available. Sandie, I you probably picked it up at a health food store, right? And all the essences that I'm going to talk about are Bach flower essences. So those are a particular line of essence that's very easy to get in any good health food store or online. And the oils are a little more, there's more variability about where to get them. But again, if you go for organic pharmaceutical grade, you'll get a good oil, and you can also contact us. So I want to start with a point that's one of my very favorites, and I feel that this point is the gift for all of us this year, after we've all gone through all kinds of stress and challenge with the quarantines and the uncertainties. So it's a particularly good point for now, but it's a point for all seasons, we could say. And it's called the Palace of Weariness. So every point in Chinese medicine has an amazing poetry in its name, but also in the name is the wisdom that the ancient physicians wanted us to know. They embedded their wisdom in the point names. And that is what my other book, Kigo, is about. It's all about the wisdom of the point names. So if you want more on that book, Kigo, you'll get everything you could want and much more about points and point names. But let's just start with the simple point, the Palace of Weariness. Now, this point is in the very center of your palm. And if you lightly close a fist, you'll see where your middle finger lands, and it's on the crease closer to the wrist. So, just like let your hand be soft, let your finger drop down, and you will be in the point there. Okay. On the crease closer to your wrist. And if you're listening, again, it's just between the second and third fingers. Make a light fist where the third finger lands. You'll feel a little dip, a sensitive spot. Okay. It's a sensitive spot on the palm, and it's almost like if you let your finger go lightly, it falls right into it. The point kind of invites you in. And even just touching that point will begin to calm the heart. The meridian that this point is on is called the heart protector meridian. So Palace of Weariness is like the master point for that whole kind of energetic shield of our hearts, which we all certainly need. Especially now. I feel like everyone, especially as maybe there's a little more coming out of quarantine, coming out, it's spring. We want our hearts to be open yet protected. That's what this point is all about. And the essential oil that I is this point connects to rose essential oil like it's a divine marriage. Those two together. You just put a drop of rose essential oil on this point, and you will feel this expansion of protection and also an immediate calming of what we call the spirit. So we think about this point for agitation, if I'm getting anxious before giving a talk. I wasn't anxious with you guys. I just knew we'd have an easy, but if I am, giving a talk about in front of a lot of people, rose essential oil, then I feel like I can be open, I can be connected, but I'm protected. So calming the heart, calming the spirit, if you're feeling anxious, agitated, especially around connection or the heart, this is the point to go to.
Would you use that for depression as well?
You can, but I actually have another point that I think this point is more like, let's calm things down. We could say mania. It's a point that calms those manic states, calms the heart. It's also a beautiful point for brokenheartedness. When you feel like your heart's been broken, rose on this point. The other kind of function that this point serves really well is for the sense of I'm being invaded. I don't feel protected. So that's where, in that case, I would turn to the flower essence called walnut. So the two here, you can choose your rose essential oil for calming, for that sense that I'm open yet protected, that my broken heart is healing. But when you feel actually the threat of invasion, or I'm in a situation that might be a little bit uncertain or a little bit new, and I want to be protected from negativity, or I'm visiting people that I love, but I tend to get hit with unconscious negative energies, then I would use walnut flower essence on this point, because walnut flower essence supports us in being protected from outside influences, gives us that freedom to be me and not be hit by those outer thoughts or energies or critical, even unconscious critical comments. Okay, so that's Palace of Weariness. It's a deeply restoring point, a restorative point, a calming point. And sometimes I say it brings us to a kind of palace where we can heal, we can restore, and we can convalesce from a difficult time. Okay.
Does this work with people who are maybe on prescription drugs?
Absolutely. When I used to teach at the college, I'd have a lot of young students, very idealistic, and they'd say, well, how can you treat someone who's on antidepressants or, pharmaceutical? And I'm like, how can you not?
So how does that work? I mean, if a person is on, prescription drugs, antidepressants, and they use this method, can you just tap in? Can you just talk about that a little bit, how that really works? I'm just curious.
Yes. Well, what I say is the pharmaceutical drug is kind of a loud noise in the psyche.
Yep. Right.
And sometimes the noise is loud that we don't hear their songs. And these methods, these more subtle methods, are a little quieter sound in the psyche, but they're still going to sing. And then gradually, if we use them, they actually will modify, they'll change the whole way that the psyche is feeling. And, what I have found is that with a pharmaceutical drug, for example, that people may actually need, we're not saying, oh, go off all your drugs overnight, because that can be very dangerous.
Right.
And it can be too much. You've been listening to a very loud song and suddenly, whoa. But you can gradually feed in these other methods. And who knows, I've had many patients who eventually are able to completely let go of the pharmaceutical carefully over time, with their doctor's help. But it does happen, and it actually is not an infrequent occurrence. So I say start with these. Start with, if you have the benefit, if you can afford acupuncture, it's also incredible. But even if you can't have the time or the money for acupuncture, begin with the points, begin with the flower essences, begin with the oils. And these are your friends, and they will begin to gradually shift your psychological states.
What about if somebody's in a high emotional state, like panic or anger?
Yes. Well, I want to talk, maybe that'll take us to the next point.
Okay.
House of Weariness is, with the point we just talked about, is a calming point, and it's a balancing and harmonizing point. But if you're in big agitation, big rage, you're going to want to go, I would go to something a little bit more maybe potent isn't the right word, with a little bit more shock value. Okay.
Yeah.
A little more shock value.
Yeah.
This is a point that has shock value, I can tell you. I mean, when you needle this point, I've had it needled. I came into my acupuncturist and I was in a state of I was basically in full on heart palpitations, excitement, agitation, like my chi was off the top of my head. And she needled this point, and I remember just going. It was like I was in an elevator, and it just landed on the ground floor. Boom, boom. So this point is called bubbling spring.
Oh.
Okay, and I can't really show it to you because it's at the bottom of your foot. So I'm gonna find it while I describe to you how to find it. And people who are listening or people who are tuned in, I take your shoes and socks off and find this point. This point is your go-to point for those moments of extreme agitation, as you're saying, rage. Like in the classical texts, they actually say this is the kind of rage when you want to go and just bash someone over the head. It's like big rage, big agitation. And bubbling spring, again, when we talk about the archetype of this point is that we can open the bottom of the foot and open to the fresh waters that take us down to the center of the earth. The bubbling spring is our connection to earth center.
Grounding
In a big way. And the point, it's between the second and third toe. So our first point was between the second and third finger. So this is almost like a partner point on the sole of the foot. I'm touching it right now, and I feel myself even now coming down. Between the second and third toe, and it's about a third of the way down from down from the toes. You can point your toes a little bit and you'll feel, again, there's a lovely depression. Your finger will drop right into it. And again, for those of you who are sensitive, you're going to touch that point and you will immediately feel your chi body, your subtle body kind of drop, kind of calm down. Now, again, a needle in that point, you can imagine, but what I always say is when you need a needle in that point, it feels so good. It hurts so good because it just drops you. And I don't know, Sandie, I know you've had quite a bit of acupuncture. I don't know if you've ever had that point done, but it actually is one of my favorites.
Yeah, I can't remember having that one done.
All right, well, there you go. But you can do the flower essences and oils on that point. It has a very strong effect.
Would you ever use them together? An essence and an oil?
Yes. And that's a really good question, because what I didn't say when we were going back over the caveats is I said you do not take oils internally, but you do take flower essences internally.
Oh, okay.
Because it's just water with light in it and a little tiny bit of alcohol, of spirits to preserve it. So if someone is sensitive to alcohol, you just put it in a little spoon with some hot water, and that the alcohol's gone and you can take it internally. But otherwise, just take it straight out of the bottle. Yes, so that's a very good idea, that you can actually, if you want to use the oil on the point and a few drops of the flower essence in your mouth. Otherwise, I apply the flower essence to the point itself, but I wouldn't do them together at the same time.
Right.
I'm curious about the pause practice.
Oh,
Let me ask you this. I'm just, so if somebody's in this rage, and just like really high level rage, how can they calm themselves enough to be able to do the pressure point on their foot? And I'm thinking maybe the practice of the pause.
Yeah, the pause, it's, we talk about the pause as a primary. It is the first step in alchemy. The first step in alchemy is when I recognize that I'm triggered. And instead of expending the energy, acting on it and spilling that energy out, I actually turn around and say, okay, I'm going to take a breath here and not act in the habitual way.
Right.
It's the hardest thing any of us can do, but it is the beginning of alchemy. So I would say when we look at bubbling spring as a place where I'm in that rage, the first step, if I can just say, okay, I'm triggered. And then take that long breath. And then remember, okay, I'm triggered. I'm going to go to the spring and I'm going to ground back down into the center of the earth. Those together. The other image that I use with the pause practice is I get that recognition and I just get like this sliver of distance from the emotion. And I imagine I'm putting my hand on this raging lion and I'm just calming her down. So calming her down, getting her to sit down next to me, and then going down to my foot and pressing on that point really hard.
Yeah.
Can really help. It really will. And I think I just want to give the oil for that, which is balsam fir, has also a tremendous rooting and calming effect. So if people actually have issues around, you have rage that is something you're working with, I'd have balsam fir on hand. You take a big, long inhalation, put it on the foot and press hard and breathe.
Lorie, we've really cutting it fine now, time-wise. We've probably got about 3 minutes left. Is there another point that is really important that you could tell us about very quickly?
Yes, good. Let's do it. So it's called yin tong, and it's right here. It's the third eye point.
Third eye.
Yeah. Yin tong, which translated means the hall of impressions. Right? And it's right midline between your eyebrows, and you'll feel a little notch there. And this is a point for anxiety, for any kind of, but also even more than anxiety, when you feel like you're agitated, or you have insomnia, or you're feeling like it's too much. I'm just taking in too many impressions and I feel like I'm going crazy inside.
Overwhelmed, yeah.
And, or you've just watched the news. Hall of impressions. And it's a lovely point also for children who feel frightened at night. It's the point for what they call childhood anxiety or fright. And the oil, this combination of yin tang, hall of impressions, and chamomile essential oil will have the most beautiful calming effect. And I think we all need that now.
Yeah, we certainly do. Lorie, we're going to have to stop you there, I'm afraid. Very reluctantly. But, you know, your book is full of ideas and information, and you share, I think, 5 oils and 5 flower remedies in your kind of medicinal cabinet of natural remedies there, as well as the points to use them. So I would encourage viewers to go there and get your book, go to your website, get your book, find out what they can, and start using these on themselves.
Wonderful.
Rebecca, very quickly, is there anything you wanted to say before we have to say goodbye to Lorie?
I wish we had another hour.
Yeah, I know.
I know. This is so fascinating. And thank you so much for being here with us and just really giving your knowledge to us and helping us to see other ways of mental health, other ways to make awareness for mental.
Thank you for inviting me. This is my passion and my commitment, and, you know, working with the soul at this point, at this time on the planet, does seem like what the earth is asking of us.
Yeah.
So thank you both so much.
Maybe we can arrange for you to come back at a later date. And
I'd love to. I love talking about this. And thank you both
Lorie,
for what you are doing.
Yeah.
So important.
Thank you for joining us. That's Lorie Eve Dechar, The Alchemy of Inner Work, a guide for turning illness and suffering into true health and well-being. And it's widely available in bookstores and online. And you can go to Lorie's site, anewpossibility.com. That's it for today. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode of Cracked the Podcast, Slaying the Dragons of Mental Health. Till then, it's goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me.
And don't forget, there's a crack in everything. It's where the light gets in.